Welcome to Speedrunner Reviews. In this series I analyse games using the mindset of speedrunning and look at the game from three perspectives. First the casual experience, which is how most people first play the game. Next the speedrun experience, including all the interesting tech and how well the game holds up as a speed game. And finally the tool-assisted speedrun, showing what the game looks like when pushed to the theoretical limit. The casual review should introduce you to the game if you're not familiar with it, but if you want to jump straight to the speedrun part, I've left timestamps in the description and chapters on the video. And today we're looking at Mega Man 1 on the NES. Before we get stuck into it, if you do enjoy this video, consider subscribing to keep up to date. It helps out the channel a whole bunch, and I have a new video up each fortnight. Okay, so Mega Man 1, the first in a very long series of Mega Man games. Essentially what we're looking at here is a platformer at heart. You can run, you can jump, you can shoot, that's pretty much it. And these basic mechanics lead to a really deep game. Now if that's all it was, this probably wouldn't be too special compared to a lot of other NES games, but there is one unique gimmick to this game. And that gimmick is related to the bosses at the end of each level. When you start off, you just have your normal Mega Buster to take care of the bosses, and it is very difficult. But every time you beat a boss, you gain their weapon ability, and then you can use that weapon ability on the next boss. If you do the bosses in the right order, it's like a big game of rock, paper, scissors essentially. So you can just basically use their weapon, and bam. Boss is weak to it, you'll take out basically half their health bar or a third of their health bar or something. It's pretty ridiculous. To sort of complement this system, you've got a stage selection at the start, and you can just do the stages in any order you want. But basically the order I'd recommend is Guts, Cut, Elect, Ice, Fire, and then Bomb, if you want to play it that way. Now this system actually means the game gets easier as you go on because you have access to more weapons, so it's a bit of a weird difficulty curve. But I guess what they're expecting you to do is try a bunch of the stages and figure out which one stage you can beat, and then sort of take it from there. Each stage usually has a bit that's really brutal to deal with. Like in Gutsman stage, you have these platforms. Not too bad at the start, but if you're standing on the platform and it goes over one of these holes, you zip down straight away and die pretty much instantly. And for another example, we have Electman stage. This stage is pretty notorious because it's a big vertical stage in a game where vertical movement isn't that easy to do. You have to do pretty tight jumps on all these platforms, and there's some pretty pesky enemies to deal with along the way. One other thing I'll mention about this stage, and I'm really sorry for putting it in your brain, but the music sounds very much like a particular Journey song. I think the stage select in this game, while intimidating at first, actually does really help the game along. So they can really crank the difficulty up in specific levels, knowing that if you get frustrated, you'll just sort of move on and go to a different level, come back to it later when you're a bit more skilled at the game. So for that reason, it's pretty replayable. You can play it in different orders, and as a kid you can get a lot of fun out of it even if you can't beat any one individual level. Now in fact, I remember my story with this game. Basically I picked it up as one of my very first ever NES games. We bought a NES basically in our sort of mid-teens, so it was quite late on actually. Basically I would be at a shift at work or something, and my brother would be at home playing Mega Man, and I would get home and it would be like, oh my goodness, I've beaten 2 more levels than we could before. And seriously, each level was probably like a 5 or 6 hour investment because we were just that bad at the game. We couldn't beat them, and every time we beat one level it was a really big event. I don't know how long we had that NES on for, but we did eventually get to the end of Mega Man without any save states or anything on the real hardware. Now if you're playing this game for yourself, one thing that you can do to sort of cheese it is keep killing enemies that are easy to kill and hoping that they drop health pickups. If you leave a screen and come back onto it, the enemies will respawn, so you can just keep doing that over and over. For example, this screen, you could come on, you could kill one of these guys and then just leave and come back. I think the best one to do it on is this enemy just here, because well, you can just kill it when it comes back down, see if it drops health, and then come back on screen. That was pretty much my brother's approach to playing this game, and he would always come into the bosses on full health for that reason. My approach was a little bit different. I just went in head first and kept dying, but got more practice at the bosses that way, so we sort of complemented each other's skills and eventually got through the game. Now one really important thing to note about when we were playing it, this was back in probably about 2010-ish. We actually didn't have internet at that point, so we were completely in a void with no information about what skills were good against which bosses and things like that. So it was much like playing Mega Man back in the day. So if you know a bit about this game, you'll know that Cut is good against electricity. Sort of makes sense, you cut the power, right? But we basically had to play each level to figure out what the boss weakness was, and that's what added a lot to the playtime and trial and error of this game. One example of that is this item called the Magnet Beam. It's actually compulsory, and beyond that it's very, very useful all over the game. You actually need Gutsman's ability to get it, and it's in Electman stage. So if you don't really know that, then you're going to have to do Electman stage twice just to come and get this Magnet Beam. All those kind of things are things that would have been very easy to Google, but unfortunately we just couldn't do it at the time. And probably the best use of Magnet Beam is stuff like this, where you can just skip a whole bunch of platforming in Iceman stage. Including these pesky puzzles where blocks spawn and you have to sort of get them in the right order and make the jumps. No, you just Magnet Beam up over it, provided you have enough ammo for the Magnet Beam. But given one shot of Magnet Beam uses one ammo, you can shoot really long lines with it and then not really use that much ammo at all. Now, speaking of stuff that would have helped us if we had Google, there's one pretty notorious glitch in this game called the select glitch. Now, normally when you're fighting a boss, you've just got to hit it with your weapon, and then you have to shoot another shot to hit it again. It's got a cooldown timer, that's essentially why that happens. But if you can fire a shot at the boss and then sort of pause, the cooldown timer ticks down as the game is paused. And then you can sort of unpause and pause again, and then you get another hit, and then you can unpause again. And all of a sudden you've beaten the boss in one hit. It's called the select glitch because you have to use the select button to pause in this game, but essentially if we had known that, it would have made this game much easier to tackle. Sort of your personal choice as to whether you want to use that glitch or not in a playthrough, but it definitely makes the game a little bit more enjoyable for me these days using it. Now, apart from that select glitch, this game is pretty solid and glitch free unless you're really trying to break stuff. Except for this one thing that I always like playing around with. Basically, if you go on this spot here and wiggle around, you can get heaps of weird effects in Iceman stage. To my understanding, it's just like different parts of the stage loading. So you can get the game to reset itself, or you can get like funky, weird color effects like this. Pretty fun to play around with. I'm sure it won't come up later, right? Now, after long enough playing this game, you do eventually gain some intuition for how to deal with each enemy type. For example, this guy here is very difficult to deal with because he sort of opens up and shoots, very easy to get hit. But if you know that basically it's always 2 blocks away that he spawns, you can stand right here and he won't shoot, you can stand a little bit further and he will. Then you can basically just time your shots so that you can always hit him right as he's opening pretty much. Same thing for this one, just hit him as soon as you come up that ledge. And then this one is a little bit earlier, but basically you can hit him right there. Once you know these enemy patterns, it becomes pretty easy to get through the game. There's one later as well. It's actually in this same level as these guys here. Basically, if you walk up to them, then you're pretty much always going to get hit. And it's pretty hard to shoot them as well, just because, well, they're above you. And you can't really shoot up unless you have a Legman's beam. But they actually go to your height, so you can basically just jump and lure them up. And in fact, you can almost play Mega Man a bit pacifist like this. You kind of usually have to shoot that second one down. But if you just lure them up, it's much easier than trying to make them come down and keeping on getting hit and stuff like that. Similar thing at the start of Cutman stage, you could try and take these guys out, but if you know they go to your height, then you can pretty much just jump over them and not really worry about it. And as soon as they get off screen, they're done. I'm not going to sit here and talk about every single enemy in the game, but rest assured there's usually patterns that you can sort of exploit with each one. Once you've beaten all the main stages, you get to go to Dr. Wily's stage, and it's pretty much just a set of 4 stages there that really test all the skills that you've learned throughout the game. You're going to have to use sort of all your abilities, Magnet Beam, Elect Beam, stuff like that, and take on a few really cruel bosses. This one in particular here is notorious, the Yellow Devil. Basically, if you use the select glitch, this boss is incredibly easy. If you don't, then it's incredibly difficult. I think the thing that makes this set of 4 levels so hard is that your ammo actually doesn't restore between the two. So I've used almost all my leg beam there, and then here I won't have much of it left. But essentially what you can do is just die and you'll get your ammo back. It's pretty easy to do, get a refill, although it just takes a little bit longer, so not ideal in a speedrun. You got a few really iconic moments like this bit where you fight essentially a clone of yourself. And this game also introduced the boss rush, which was pretty much a staple in all future Mega Man games. Although if you know the boss's weaknesses, the boss rush is pretty easy to deal with. Now, a lot of people will tell you that Mega Man 2 is the best in the series and that it improved a lot over Mega Man 1. I have some frustrations with certain sections in Mega Man 2, and it's probably just that I didn't play Mega Man 2 that much when I originally had the NES, but Mega Man 1 is definitely my favourite in the series. If you haven't tried it, give it a go, and if you've got patience, try it without save states or anything. It's a pretty enjoyable experience. Alright, now we'll talk about the speedrun. Now, if you try to look for Mega Man on speedrun.com, you're not going to have a whole lot of luck. And that's because it's one of the few games that isn't on speedrun.com. They have their own website. This is the megamanleaderboards.net, and this is where you'll find speedruns for Mega Man 1. And it's quite a thriving community. Now, the first category I'm going to talk about is the glitchless category in 2232. And part of the reason for this is because I essentially ran this category a really long time ago. Unfortunately, I don't have surviving footage, but I ran it on my PAL NES and figured out all the strategies without any internet or anything or knowing what the record was at all. And it was really satisfying because a lot of the strategies that I figured out when I finally looked at the world record used those strategies. I'm fairly sure in the early days I was using the select glitch, so technically it wasn't glitchless, but eventually I did do a couple runs where I didn't use the select glitch. And the record we're going to look at here is by Cool Kid, who's probably best known for his world record on Tasmania Master System, but Mega Man's a little side project of his. Now, first thing you'll notice about this run is we're playing on the Japanese version, Rockman. It's actually a pun. There's another character in the game called Roll, like rock and roll. Anyway, first thing to notice about this game is that walking is faster than jumping. Just by a little bit, but it's worth walking whenever you can, rather than jumping if you can avoid it. So basically, the level order is going to follow the level order I suggested for Guts, then Cut, then Elect, Ice, Fire, and Bomb. No skips for this little section here, just doing it normally. Now, in this section here, we have these enemies, and there's a choice of whether to hit them or just walk through them, basically. Cool Kid's going to be shooting them because Cool Kid is very fast at mashing. I remember when I was playing this RTA, it was about the same speed to do both, but if you walk through, then, well, you got the downside of losing health, essentially. So it's always a trade-off there, but if you're fast at mashing, this game becomes a little bit easier as well. These enemies here are absolutely notorious. They can do a small jump or a big jump, and it's sort of random which one they do. My strategy usually is to wait for them to do a big jump and then go underneath, but Cool Kid's jumped over the top. Gutsman is the only boss we'll have to fight sort of without the boss's weakness, and really importantly, when Gutsman lands on the ground, if you're on the ground, you'll get stunned for a little bit, so you have to always jump when this happens. One of the main notable things in Cutman stage is this screen here. You can save a little bit of time by jumping up on the left bit there. That jump is really hard to do because more often than not you'll bonk your head on the ceiling if you do it too early, or fall off the edge if you do it too late. The other tricky thing in this stage can be getting up these 1 block wide ladders. Cool Kid's actually going to take damage before going through, so that they don't take damage off the enemy up on the ladder and fall off the ladder. And Cutman is weak to Guts, so essentially from this point on we're just going to be using the boss's weaknesses against them. If you're precise enough, you're able to freeze these enemies here. That makes it a lot easier to get through. And this bit is supposed to be really difficult, but if you jump up from the left side of the platform, it makes it really quite easy. We then got this little bit here with the ladder. So you'll notice on the next screen, Cool Kid sort of jump onto the ground and then back up onto the ladder here. That will save a little bit of time there, just because, well, you're not doing the slow ladder climbing animation. Up here we have the first sort of invisible block spawning thing there, and you got to wait for them to come up in a particular order. So this bit is a little bit faster because you don't have to wait for the blocks to come in, but you have to do one of those really tight jumps where you can easily bonk the ceiling, so there's a lot of trade-off there. Now, when I used to run this RTA, there were sort of two things that put me off it. The first was the mashing speed, the second was the magnet beam. Up till this point I can usually match the record kind of closely, but with the magnet beam they just pull out miles ahead. So we'll see it immediately here. The magnet beam is just going to save so much time just everywhere. So basically by spawning little magnet beams on ladders, you can do that little jump trick that I mentioned before. So jumping up rather than doing the slow climbing animation. And the precision of this is something that I could never quite master when I played the game. So I guess I use the magnet beam a lot less. You want to fire really long beams of it because you don't use any more ammo. Like one beam just costs 1 unit of ammo, no matter how long it is. And then you can sort of use that to get across really quickly without doing a lot of platforming. This little climb here is absolutely brutal using the magnet beam to get up there. The other thing that I'll mention is that if you pause while on this ladder at all, Mega Man is going to drop down, so you got to be careful. Your intuition is to swap to cut right before the fight, but if you're playing this game casually, it might not be a bad idea to swap to cut in the fight so that you don't fall down the ladder. As I mentioned before, Iceman stage benefits heavily from the magnet beam here, just skipping all this slow water platforming. I'm fairly sure the water slows you down, although to be honest I can't remember because I haven't been in there in years, but the magnet beam basically helps you just zoom across really quickly. We're supposed to wait for the blocks to spawn in this section, but essentially you can just jump up with the magnet beam and go across. This level is one where the magnet beam ammo actually does become a pretty big issue, especially since after all this magnet beaming you want a magnet beam across this section here. Now if you ever run out you can sort of drop down to get that ammo there, but Cool Kid has just enough to get across without doing it. The other thing I'll mention with the magnet beam is that the whole time that you're on it, Mega Man's falling speed increases as if you're falling through. So if you ever want to fall down really quickly, you can just basically be walking on a magnet beam and wait for it to despawn, and that'll do the trick. Iceman is weak to electricity, so basically the fight goes over really quickly. In the later games, they did sort of nerf this power, so electricity here does literally 1/3 of the health bar. In later games, the weaknesses just tend to do a little bit more damage rather than such a ridiculous amount. But I like the ridiculous amount. Up until here, the strats that I discovered without internet were pretty similar. Here I used to use the electricity beam to get through these enemies. Basically, it would kill all of them really quickly. And since they're all in like little plus sort of shapes, one electricity beam kills a whole bunch of enemies pretty quickly. I'm assuming Cool Kid's gone for the ice beam there just for lag reasons, since the elect beam is super laggy. In this stage, you can freeze those little fire bars with your ice, or you can just magnet beam over the top of them, depends which one you want to do. But doing that skips a whole lot of platforming here. And actually timing the magnet beam can be quite difficult, so you want to fire it and then jump, but right before you get to the end of your jump, that's when you want to release it so that it stops. If you release it too high, then you won't actually be able to jump up onto it. So when I was playing this level, I was using ice a lot more to get through the fire bars, but Cool Kid's using the magnet beam instead, which is fair enough. It seems quite a bit quicker actually. And this screen coming up here, I actually don't know the way to get through this screen without taking damage, apart from literally using the magnet beam to get up the side like that. This next screen has a strategy that I was really proud of when I found. Basically, I used to freeze this guy with the ice beam, and then that was like a really effective way to get past him. You can just magnet beam over the top, but from memory, when I actually did run this, at the time, the world record strategy was ice beam to get past this guy, and I was really satisfied that it was actually the same as the one I'd found. Magnet beam is just too powerful in this game. Basically, it overrides most other strats. One very notable thing in the Wily stage is you can actually use electricity to get rid of Gutsman's blocks, so that's going to be pretty effective and a lot quicker than using Gutsman to get rid of them. It's important to fire them off really early, otherwise you're going to get stuck next to a block and just have to be firing electricity into it later. And you'll notice weapon swaps happen usually when we're on ladders. That's because, well, it causes you to drop off the ladder, so it's a little bit quicker than just swapping it on flat ground. You also want to swap weapons whenever you're like jumping rather than walking. At the end of stage 2, we have the Mega Man clone fight. The best way to deal with this is the fire beam. For some reason, he's just worse at dodging that and also weak to that, so it really helps. Now you'll notice Cool Kid actually sort of walking into the clone here with the shield in a second. Part of the reason for that is that it really does help save a lot of ammo, and the fire beam is probably the most useful beam in this little set of 4 stages there. And just a reminder, your ammo doesn't reset between stages. In particular, the last boss is weak to it, so you want to save as much of it as you can. Speaking of the last boss here, after the boss rush, we get through to it. Basically, you can see how much fire beam is left, so it really isn't much at all. What Cool Kid's going to do is sort of stand in the hitbox with the fire shield there. That just is so much quicker than firing individual shots across to it, but of course you're going to be taking a lot of damage while you're doing that, so it's a bit of a trade-off always. Very impressive run through there at 22:32. Alright, now that we've seen glitchless, we're going to look at all stages. Now there are various different categories that you can run. All stages, in my opinion, is sort of like the main one. It's got just the right level of glitches. You use basically all the glitches you can, except for not the glitch that basically gets you to the end of the game in 3 minutes. Now you might notice with the splits on the right, we no longer do Guts Man first in this category. Normally you would do Guts first for 2 reasons. First of all, because he's strong against Cutman, and second of all, you need his ability to get the Magnet Beam in the Legman stage. So we're going to be using a glitch to get that later. Basically this first area is going to play pretty much like glitchless. The first major thing we're going to see is like damage knockback cancel for Mega Man. So basically as soon as you get hit in this game, you're going to take damage and get, well, knocked back heaps. But if you press select and then unselect, like pause and unpause at the right time, you can just cancel that damage knockback animation. So I'll see it for the first time here. You could kill this enemy, or you can just get hit, pause, unpause, and then you cancel all that knockback. Similarly, this screen goes through without needing to do that glitch, but the very next screen you have an enemy right in your way. So that could actually be a really good move for casual play. As soon as you get hit, you just pause and unpause, and then you don't get knocked back. In particular, it can be really useful for this guy. Rather than trying to take 2 damage getting past it, you can just cancel the knockback and get straight through. But luckily for Cool Kid, it jumped over and resulted in not taking damage at all. Now the next glitch we'll see is like a ladder grab off screen. Basically, if you jump off the top of the screen, you get to the bottom. So jump, grab the ladder, go through. It's a pretty weird glitch, all things considered. But it sort of makes sense because the screens sort of just loop on themselves. Normally you don't run into those kind of effects unless there's a ladder or something, you can just grab onto it like that. Now probably the best part about this category is you get to use the select glitch finally to deal with bosses. Basically what Cool Kid's going to do is get Cutman stuck in the corner and then keep using the select glitch to make sure 1 bullet at a time deals damage basically as quick as possible. Now getting him stuck in the corner does 2 things. Basically it makes it easier for you to deal the damage and not take damage from him. Secondly, it causes a little bit less lag when Cutman dies because he's closer to the edge of the screen. Now when you fight each stage, the boss generates sort of like a random amount of points, so you would usually want that to be low. So for example 60,000 points here, it takes time to tick up to that 60,000. Cool Kid doesn't have much control over that, but it's worth noting, and Elecman here is going to waste more time being at 80,000 points. Now we'll go through getting the Magnet Beam early, which is on the next couple screens. Essentially it's a ladder glitch. Now the Taz can achieve this by pressing left plus right on the ladder, but to my understanding the way they get that one is just by grabbing the ladder from a little bit too high up and then zipping around the screen there. That saves a whole bunch of time because you don't have to do Guts Man before Cut Man, and essentially it means you get the Magnet Beam all through Guts Man stage, which is also going to save a whole bunch of time. You'll see Cool Kid here intentionally doing that damage knockback cancel there just to get towards this section a little bit sooner, but really this stage plays out pretty similar to glitchless at this point. Damage knockback cancel there as all helps, of course. Alright, next up we have Iceman stage, and we're going to start seeing our first zips. So zips happen when you get stuck between the Magnet Beam and a ceiling, and it's very precise positioning to get that to happen. But essentially what's going to happen here is we're going to get the Magnet Beam really close to the ceiling, and Mega Man's going to zip through the roof of the stage there. You can also press pause to extend the zip a little bit, and that is obviously much faster movement than the alternative, which is just running straight across the Magnet Beam. We zip across here, which triggers a screen transition, and again here, which triggers another one, and that again is much faster than the alternative, which is going on the blocks. Magnet Beam across this little section again, and then we're really towards the end of the stage here. You can see Cool Kid slowing down for the ammo pickup, but then just keeping on progressing right. And a couple more zips off the top of the screen, and then we're already at the boss. You can also zip through the corridors in this section leading up to the boss. Again, that is quite precise positioning, but Cool Kid gets it there pretty well. Fireman stage plays out pretty much normally until we get to this little section here. Essentially just zipping off the top of the screen allows you to grab the bottom of the screen, like what we saw before in Iceman stage, but it's also like the ladder glitch in Cutman stage, and that just gets you there a lot faster. On this next screen we have a very important big zip. You can basically zip up onto the next screen in such a way that you're stuck in a floor, and then you can zip all the way to the right as you go through. It's pretty dangerous to do, but then here you can just zip all the way through there. Saves heaps of time. I should mention that the reason zips actually work is the collision code. It's trying to eject Mega Man out of the ceiling because he's sort of stuck in the ceiling there, and ejection code just pushes you out really fast to the right. There's a really good write-up on Taz videos about this zipping mechanic, but essentially you do have to face left to get through it as well. Zipping will eject you in the opposite direction, but then there's also all these extra conditions that you have to follow as well. Now, Bombman stage plays out pretty much normally until we get to this screen, and guess what? It's another zip. So we sort of jump up here, grab the ladder from the bottom, and then sort of zip to the right there. It also means that you're coming into the boss arena out of bounds, so Cool Kid's going to fall down here. And the advantage of that is also avoiding all the enemies, very handy. But in the boss room, we sort of zip down to the boss and use the weakness on the boss, which is fire there. Select glitch just helps take it out really quickly. Now in a normal glitchless run, this would be where we go to Wily stages, but we actually haven't beaten Gutsman yet. And we've got all the weapons and the magnet beam, which you don't normally have in a glitchless run for Gutsman. You'll immediately see why the magnet beam's worth it, because you can skip this horrible platforming section here. Very nice indeed. So it's weird, because you never really have the magnet beam in this level at all glitchless, no matter what route you took, because you need Gutsman to get it. But it's probably one of the stages where magnet beam saves the most time. I also just really love the effect that zipping has on these enemies here. Gutsman's weakness is actually Bomb, and part of the reason why I recommend doing him first in RTA is, like, Bomb is really slow and really hard to use against bosses. Now there with the select glitch it's worth it, but that's why I personally like doing Gutsman first, because Bomb's just too annoying to use, so you might as well have Gutsman be the one boss you beat without having a weakness for it. Now casually, it's worth mentioning that Wily Stage 1 is probably the most brutal right at the start. It's got these 3 enemies that I always think look like telephones, and basically they take a third of your health bar each, and it's pretty hard to get past them without taking damage, so there's not really a whole lot of alternative. Cool Kid does 2 sort of select, pause, cancel, damage, knockback, cancel things into the first 2, and then just magnets over the third one, so it's a pretty clean strategy. Now this room coming up is probably the best use of the go off the top and come out the bottom of the screen glitch. If you have a look, he's going to jump up the left top bit of the room and then come up the ladder on the bottom. That would be super easy to do casually, and it's a pretty good saver for going through that horrible section with the bullet thing that's usually going to do you damage. And in probably one of the most satisfying parts of the run, this fight, which is normally like a multi-phase, really difficult fight, just becomes one phase because of the select glitch. So there we go. Select straight through the eye and you're done. Wily Stage 2 has some pretty intense boss skips here. It is just a zip through the wall there, but we've got 2 bosses to skip in total there. So by zipping and coming up the top of the screen, you can then go out the bottom of the screen. And normally when you beat Cutman, the floor opens, allowing you to come back out the bottom, so that's why coming out the bottom there works to get to the next screen. And right after doing that one, we have to do yet another one to get through and skip the next little mini-boss. I will mention that doing this, if you do it wrong, can actually soft lock the game. And really impressively, Cool Kid actually did this glitch at ESA where, if it failed, would have soft locked the game and there would be no backup. So shout out to Cool Kid for doing that. Very impressive in a marathon setting. Now, Wily Stage 3, very surprisingly, has a zip. So there's this section towards the end of the level where you're running through this big water corridor thing, and it usually takes ages to run through, but it is quite satisfying because you run really fast. By zipping into that section, you're basically stuck in the wall and you can just immediately pause through it to extend your zip. And there we go, straight into the boss. Now this boss is a little bit awkward. Can't remember the exact number, there's 7 or 8 of these little orbs and only 4 blocks. So usually the strategy is kill the first 3 normally and then do blocks on the last ones. But by grabbing the block with specific timing, I think it's the frame where the old block leaves the screen, you can actually clone the blocks. And I do this sometimes accidentally casually, so this is a glitch that I knew about for a really long time. But by cloning these blocks, you can use blocks on pretty much all the boss things there, so it makes it a lot faster. Now this stage has a really big boss rush. There's 4 bosses because the other 2 were in the earlier stages there, but there is a skip for all 4. Pretty much if you explode with the bomb in Bombman, you can get Mega Man sort of up into the roof and sort of zipping to the right here through a whole bunch of boss rooms, and then Mega Man dies. So the weird thing is though, by going through these specific coordinates by zipping right, you actually set the checkpoint for right before Wily. So even though you die, you can spawn back right at the Wily fight and then just go through and beat the game. Alright, and here we go, just same strategy as what was in Glitchless really, getting Mega Man stuck in there. And because there's no real cooldown timer on Wily, you can basically just jump into that hitbox and keep dealing a whole bunch of damage really quickly. But it is risky because you're going to be low on health as a result. That's all the run, and very impressive. Some of these glitches are very difficult to do, pixel perfect, frame perfect stuff, so good work on the 1808. Now before we finish up the RTA section, there's one more run I want to talk about, and that's any percent with Ace in 312. This is actually by a Japanese runner. It's on Nico Video, and Nico Video is a really good resource for some obscure speedrunning stuff you might find. My best way of describing it is sort of like the Japan's equivalent of YouTube. So essentially what this run does is it gets the magnet beam and then takes a game over in a Lek Man stage just so it can take it out. Normally you can't exit stages, but by game overing you could keep the magnet beam without having to go and beat the boss itself. Next up we go into Gutsman stage and start up the manipulation for Ace. And one thing I love about Nico Video are these comments that you get on the top, so we'll see quite a few of those as the Ace glitch goes on. I don't fully understand how this glitch works, but it's essentially manipulating a whole bunch of enemies and triggering a glitch which is related to having a lot of objects on screen all at once. We see quite a bit of setup with very precise enemy kills and positioning for the drops that come out of the enemies here. And then eventually we see a big magnet beam up to tackle some more enemies, but the Ace really gets triggered when you wiggle around on a scene, much like I was showing in the Iceman stage before during the casual review. So we get up there, wiggle around on the seam, and there's the credits. That's it for the RTA section here, and a pretty impressive run to pull off without Taz tools. Alright, now we'll move on to the Taz section. So we got the baseline Taz here, which is much faster than the any percent all levels which we saw before. And then we've also got the game end glitch. So also much faster than that game end glitch we just saw in 3 minutes. So how are they faster? Well, Taz does some pretty interesting stuff with this game. Before I talk about the Taz in particular, I really want to mention this page on Taz videos. It's in Game Resources under Rockman. It documents pretty much all the stuff that's going to be useful to making tiny little optimizations in this Taz. One thing that I already mentioned here, walking is faster than jumping. That's something you can find out pretty easily, but then it goes into details about how to grab ladders in which particular position, with some counterintuitive stuff about grabbing ladders lower sometimes is faster than grabbing ladders higher, and then some stuff about the knockback cancel and everything like that. In particular, you're invincible in that pausing, unpausing animation. And then it goes into all the details about zipping, which I showed before. So if you want a technical breakdown of little frame saves and everything, this page is going to be probably your best resources, but I'll also try to explain it as well as I can. So a little bit about the history of this Taz. It starts off with one of the very early Tazes on this site, 2003. And eventually launches through. Pretty much these ones here are normal compared to the RTA run we saw for all stages, but eventually we start getting the times down significantly, and that's due to like a basically ending level early glitch, which we'll see. This is the current 945, and I remember when it came out it was very impressive. You can really tell how much work has gone into this game, especially by the author count at the bottom of that. First of all, they manipulate Iceman down to only be 50,000 points, makes it a little bit faster to tick down. Iceman stage starts off with manipulating a whole bunch of enemies together. Remember when I said about that wiggling back and forth glitch in Iceman stage? Well, hey, it's come back. Essentially, they've called an object which ends the level. It's similar to the object you will grab at the end of the level, which sort of ticks up the totals there. And again, Fireman, 50,000 points. All these bosses are going to be manipulated for 50,000 points. You might also notice that with that object ending the level, the graphics are absolutely messed up. So this Taz is not going to look very normal. I actually wouldn't mind seeing 2 categories for this Taz, one that does the end of level glitch and one that doesn't. Originally it was just 1 or 2 levels that could end early in the older versions of the Taz, but now it's most levels that you'd be able to end early with this glitch. Fireman stage though is pretty normal, all things considered. We just sort of do zips through, similar to what we saw in RTA there, and then take on the boss. So even though we didn't actually beat the Iceman boss because we called the end of level script, it still gives you Iceman's weapon. Now we can use that on Fireman there. Alright, Gutsman is next, and considering we saw the game end glitch with Gutsman in the RTA runs, it's pretty reasonable to expect we'll have some kind of stage end glitch in Gutsman as well. So he's got a magnet beam to get across to this section, which has both a lot of enemies and a loading line between areas of the level. And then yeah, you pretty much wiggle there and get the end of the level straight away. To my understanding, a lot of brute forcing went down into this TAS to try a lot of different combinations to get the end of level glitch, and a few scripts were involved. So actually manually testing getting the game and the level end glitches would be far too time consuming on this TAS, so this is how they do it instead. And pretty much any of these little level end glitches you're seeing is wiggling around on a seam where different parts of the level are loading in and loading out. We do a lot of vertical zips to get up to this section in Cutman stage and then just go straight across. You can see some kind of manipulation happening here for the enemies here. Getting a little weapon refill as well. And lots of more vertical zips to get up to this section. One thing that's going to look unusual in this TAS is actually having the magnet beam for almost all of it, even though we haven't done a Legman stage yet. And that's because in doing the level end glitch in Iceman stage, we got the magnet beam sort of, not as a side effect, but they sort of also got the magnet beam while doing the same glitch. So you never normally see magnet beam in Cutman because you would do cut then elect, but here you go, you got the magnet beam and it saves heaps of time. Similarly, there's no way you should ever have magnet beam at the start of a Legman stage, since you're supposed to get magnet beam in this stage, and it allows for some pretty speedy zips to get up. Zips normally are good for horizontal movement, but by sort of zipping in between the walls you can get some really good vertical movement out of these as well. It's a bit of a shame that the graphics are broken for pretty much the rest of the game, but Pyrohiko also did an encode which had the graphics fixed if you're interested in watching that. Next up we have Bombman stage, and what do we got? A long horizontal scrolling section with lots of enemies, and it's long enough that you need a loading line between areas of the horizontal scrolling stage. Guess what that means? We're going to end the level early. We have Dr. Wily's stage up next, and similarly here, we got a horizontal scrolling section with some enemies, so we're going to end the level early. Similarly in Wily stage 2, horizontal scrolling, heaps of enemies. Let's end the level early. You can probably see here why I wouldn't mind having a branch for non-level early ending, but that's essentially what the old TASs of this category used to be anyway. And with all these level end glitches, you can probably see why this comes in about twice as fast as RTA, because RTA doesn't really do any of them. We have the last stage, and it pretty much plays out how it did in RTA. So we skip the 4 bosses by zipping right, getting a death and setting a checkpoint, and then we're straight into Wily. Interestingly, rather than just sitting in the hitbox, the select glitch is used. And I also find it interesting that you can see the background scrolling with Wily. Normally it's just a black background, but this actually sort of shows you how they pull off such a big sprite in this game, because it's not really a sprite, it's actually background tiles. I also love that the credits are just messed up as well. Definitely one of my favourite TASs just for how ridiculous it is. Alright, to round out the TAS section, we have a game end glitch in 32 seconds. So you'll notice here they don't even bother manipulating Iceman for 50,000 points, because we're not going to see the end of the level, we're going to see the end of the game here. And it saves a little bit of time just to hit A as soon as possible. Similar glitch to what we saw in the level end glitch TAS, only they're ending the game rather than ending the level. And the credits actually aren't messed up, interestingly. So 32 seconds is a lot faster than RTA, but to my understanding this one was quite precise, and I don't see RTA runners pulling this off. But hey, I could be wrong, they're capable of some pretty impressive stuff. That's going to be all for this video, and thanks so much for watching.